This is KLEAN Radio.
Welcome, Los Angeles. Welcome, everybody listening to us on KFWB News Talk 980, our flagship station. Welcome all our new listeners on Extreme Talk XM channel 165, and everybody watching us on or listening to us on KLEANradio.com. It's great. We're first week on XM 165, and we have a great show for you tonight. This is a show about addiction and the life after, and I co-host this show with Andrew Spanswick, who's basically these days Where's Waldo. He's somewhere driving around America with the great Barry Robinson. Andrew.
Hey, Judah. How's it going?
It's going great. Where are you? Where is Waldo?
I am in Ellensburg, Washington State.
Okay, I don't think anybody,
About 100 miles outside of Seattle, heading into Seattle tomorrow and then to our new hospital in Long Beach.
That's extremely exciting. And so you basically have been driving across America for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's 20 days.
20 days.
Yeah.
And how's it been?
It's been exciting, meeting a lot of interesting people and, out there talking about addiction and getting a lot of work done. Very good.
Okay, so in the past couple of days, I was at a wedding a few weeks back, as you know, in Mexico, and I met a few people along the way. And a few of the people I've been keeping in contact with have been talking to me about alcoholism and what is alcoholism. And I know, the funny thing you said to me today is, you. And, you said I was, and that's the truth. I am an alcoholic. But to the people out there that that don't know me, what is alcoholism?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of debate still about what alcoholism is. And, the definition to me isn't as important as people that recognize they have a problem with alcohol and it affects their lives to the point where they're impaired or not functioning properly. I think sometimes people get too hung up on trying to have like a very strict definition. And the irony is most of those definitions are created for insurance purposes, not in billing purposes, not for actually treatment purposes. So I think it's important that we look at each individual as a separate person and see how alcohol affects their lives. Some cases it's very clear, some cases it's a lot more subtle.
When should people start to worry? Is there a certain amount of times a week somebody drinks, the amount they drink?
Yeah, I tend to look at people's behavior more than what substances they're taking or how often they're taking them. I mean, sometimes it's very clear. Obviously, if someone's binge drinking and, or they're having a problem with prescription drugs where they actually are physically addicted to them, I mean, those are obvious cases of addiction. But most likely you can tell that a person has a problem with alcohol in particular when they have sort of secondary ramifications to the use of that substance. So DUIs, fights with spouses, health consequences, problems with their liver, problems with their stomach.
Our guest who I'm going to introduce in a second keeps on raising his hand to every basically question you're saying. Tonight's guest is this is going to be the second time he's with us, and he's actually in the studio tonight. And I got to say, he was one of my, and I could say this with all sincerity in my heart, he was one of my heroes growing up as a kid. Just probably one of the biggest influences on the sports industry ever, and the basis of one of my favorite movies from the 90s made by one of my favorite directors and writers. Let's welcome Leigh Steinberg back to KLEAN Radio.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. And there's no alcohol in the booth.
None. It's definitely a difference in radio. So I'm sure you hear that a lot. I mean, what's the first thing? I mean, were you the first super sports agent?
Well, it was 1975, and there really was not guaranteed sports representation at that point.
Right.
An owner like Mike Brown of the Bengals could simply hang up the phone and say, "We don't talk with agents." And that was when I did my first client, Steve Bartkowski, and brimming with legal experience as I was, just having come out of Berkeley Law School. And we got the largest rookie contract in NFL history. It eclipsed Joe Namath and O.J. Simpson, who were the previous standard bearers. And what happened is we were at the airport, and there are Klieg lights flashing in the sky in Atlanta, huge crowds pressed up against the police line, and the first thing we heard was, "We interrupt the Johnny Carson show to bring you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartkowski and his attorney, Leigh Steinberg, have just arrived at the Atlanta airport. We switch you live for an in-depth interview." And I realized that we weren't in Berkeley anymore.
Right.
And it was then I saw the tremendous idol worship and veneration that athletes are held in communities across the country, and thought, we can utilize their high athletic profile to make a profound difference in role modeling. They can trigger imitative behavior by retracing their roots. So at that point, I mean, virtually everyone who started with me is no longer on this planet. So right. I guess if you live long enough, you outlive your competition.
That's so at that point, you graduated Berkeley. You just graduated. We were sharing about this on the way down. You just graduated Berkeley. You didn't want to really be a lawyer.
Well, I wanted to be a lawyer. I very much wanted to be in court, in trial.
Right.
But I had political offers and offers in television news. I probably would have taken a job with the Alameda County DA's office there in Oakland. But before that ever happened, Steve Bartkowski had been the first pick in the first round of the NFL draft, and he asked me to represent him. And here we are 37 years later.
And so, a few years ago, it came out that you had gotten, you had problems with alcohol, and you've been sober for more than
827 days. Not that I'm counting.
Yeah, and that's how you always know when people are actually really sober, like the AA way. There's like they actually know the day. They have the day count.
Well, they tell you to get a sobriety date and then to treasure it and safeguard it.
And so throughout the line, so how was it throughout the line? When did it start?
I'm just discovering as I break levels of denial how early it started, because there was no alcohol in my house growing up. I didn't drink for the first time until I was in college. And I was one beer Steinberg. I would feel one beer and I'd start to get a little bit buzzed and I would just back off. And so clearly I came from a point of not drinking and then very little drinking, and then it was progressive. And of course, the field I chose is the Disneyland of drinking. At every party, at every banquet, at every game, there's endless drinking. And no one really notices to the extent that somebody's a little bit impaired. You just sort of fit in with the crowd. But progressively over time, it got worse. And then there was a series of events that happened that I didn't react in the appropriate way to. It was the death of my father, who had been a real strong role model for me and a source of unconditional support. It was a couple losses of homes that had mold in them. It was the fact that two of my kids picked up retinitis pigmentosa, which is an eye disease that ultimately leads to blindness. And then the worst was getting divorced in 2006. Right. And it meant that for the very first time in my life, I was living alone in an apartment. And I discovered you could do a very interesting thing during the day. When it was still light outside, you could actually consume alcohol, because that wasn't my pattern. My pattern was very late at night away from people, and it was a slippery slope. And in March of 2010, I finally crashed. I had alienated friends. I had alienated family. I had closed a business, which was the most successful boutique practice, which I had sold and rebought, and it was a 9-figure sell. And there I was, without clients, without family members, looking at a world, and I had a epiphany, a moment of clarity, when I came up to the front door of indigent rehab. Is this really what I was destined to do? I was supposed to change the world.
Wow. Andrew?
Yeah, no, it's it's a very interesting story, and Leigh, thank you so much for coming on again and sharing it with our expanded audience. I'm excited about that. And your story of progressive alcoholism is one of the sort of central archetypes or ways that people slip into the disease of alcoholism. Unfortunately, some people believe that alcoholism isn't a disease, and they don't believe in addiction as being an actual disease. They believe it's a lack of moral behavior combined with an environment where you're exposed to alcohol or other drugs, and that you just can't control yourself.
And weak willpower.
Weakness.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
weak willpower.
Morally insufficient.
Well,
Right, and because of that, we get a lot of people that have very negative responses to people that have issues with addiction and alcoholism. And I was just wondering, you said you got divorced. Or did a lot of that have to do with your drinking?
Not really. It was a buildup of all those factors. It was almost Jobian. I thought that blood, river of darkness, firstborn son, I just kept waiting for the next plague to come, and I felt a lot like Gulliver on the beach, tethered down with Lilliputians sticking forks in me, unable to respond. It was a feeling of helplessness, as if I could conquer the world of business. I could certainly dominate sports representation, but I couldn't stop my father from dying. I couldn't stop my marriage from crumbling. I couldn't stop houses from getting mold or kids from getting eye diseases. And anyone who mildly thinks it's not a disease, that it's about willpower, I erected the largest organization, which was filled with role modeling. We raised $700 million for charities all over the country, made a difference. But I was helpless when it came to controlling alcohol. And what happens is you get to the point where instead of being able to drink and go to sleep that night, wake up, maybe mildly impaired in some ways, it becomes Russian roulette. I could take a drink or two or three and go to sleep, or I could find myself blacked out on a highway, driving, doing anything else without any concept of how I got there.
By the way, if you just tuned in, you're listening to KFWB News Talk 980 or Extreme Talk XM Channel 165, or you might be listening to us on KLEANRadio.com. We're in the studio tonight with an amazing guy, and who happens to be one of the greatest sports agents of all time, if not the greatest, Leigh Steinberg, who obviously the movie Jerry Maguire, and has represented some of the coolest athletes. So you're talking about this really an amazing thing. You're talking about, because one of the words, and Andrew and I have spoken about this a lot, is functioning. We talk about this word a lot, and I've always said, what is functioning? People say, well, I'm a functioning alcoholic, and I want to say to them, but spiritually, are you functioning? It doesn't matter what you have. You had one of the biggest businesses, sports-wise in America, and you were functioning, on the outsides. How were you functioning inside?
I felt really good because I was raised to trigger imitative behavior. My father around the dinner table said two things are compelling values. The first is to treasure relationships, especially family, and the second is to be an agent for change and help people who couldn't help themselves. So when it came to the work I was doing with athletes, helping to stimulate their best values, or the work we were doing in society, setting up programs that moved single mothers into the first home they would ever own by making the down payment and outfitting it, or dealing with dyslexia and childhood reading problems, or saving endangered species. In city after city across the country, we're doing great work, but that was all external.
Right.
Internally, I paid no attention to my own needs at all, and basically sort of ran like a machine. And we never really paused. So you wrote a best-selling book, so you did the biggest grossing movie of all time, so you helped save the San Francisco Giants, on and on and on, but it was always focused on what's next, and none of that ever fills the potential void inside. And so highly functional, absolutely in the sense of being able to work 12, 14 hours a day, accomplish amazing amounts of things. But it left me at the end of the day feeling spent, and I would use alcohol to put myself to sleep.
Yeah, I was just going to say to Leigh and point out that, one of the difficult things about being so successful with work is it is such a high. And, we see this with musicians as well and other people that do sort of very public and very highly rewarding work with other people. And coming down from that at the end of the day is often very difficult. Having like a normal conversation can be difficult.
You're so right, because what happened is there must have been 3 straight years where I held a Super Bowl party, had 5,000 guests, was doing nonstop interviews at the Super Bowl. One day I did 33 on Radio Row, and then I'd have my 5,000 guests who were some of the best-known people in politics and entertainment and sports. We raised large amounts of money. We sent a water machine to Haiti that allowed 140,000 people to be saved every day, or a live hookup with our troops in the field in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I would walk out of that party, I had successfully networked thousands of people together, remembered every name, understood the cross-fertilization. And the next day, I was so drained that 3 straight times I relapsed, either on the trip home or when I got home.
So do you think part of that was a martyr thing? I mean, the way it's like, I deserve this now. Did that come into play at all?
Well, Judah, I think it's important to point out the concept of positive stress, right? I mean, there's 4 types of stress. One of them, negative stress, most people know about. Something bad happens, your father dies, it's a negative stress, and it wears on you. But you can have a lot of positive stress of working too hard, a lot of excitement, and that can be as wearing on you as negative stress, but you don't recognize it because you think it should be good for you, or it should feel only rewarding, and you don't realize that it's actually zapping you of energy. And alcohol as a depressant is a great substance initially to try and control the negative effects of positive stress.
There I was at a Super Bowl doing exactly those things that were most exemplary in terms of raising $85,000 for autism research, or doing Sporting Green Alliance. So it was a day of high praise, television, radio, all the rest of it. And your point's absolutely right. At the end, I just wanted to go to sleep. And so I said, a little alcohol might help me go to sleep. Next thing I knew, I was lying in the backyard with a bottle of vodka in my pocket.
And the way you
self-medicating a lot, and not only with alcohol, but now we're seeing it more with tranquilizers like benzodiazepines, Valium, Xanax, and other sleeping agents that people start off, it works, and then next thing you know, they're blacking out and not able to function, and they mix it with alcohol and other drugs to try and get that same initial effect, and tolerance stops that from happening.
I want to make one point here. I am responsible.
Right.
No one poured alcohol down me. No one forced me to do it. There were more positive ways. There's no one to blame in this except my own lack of care for myself and not being more diligent in this. But I'm the one who did the drinking. I'm the one who did the actions. And, I've spent a couple of years making amends.
Yeah, I hate the word blame because it does bring up so many sort of moral type of consequences and issues. But I am for personal responsibility, and I think that you're absolutely right, Leigh, that even if you suffer from an illness, you still have to be responsible for your actions. It's impossible to heal and grow as a human being without taking that responsibility. So
this is for years. So when you got sober in 2010, were there rehab? There were rehabs before. Was that your first shot at sobriety? Or
no, I had gone through several rehabs, and I was an ideal student. Matter of fact, as an overachiever, I had to overachieve in that.
Right.
So I did the assignments the fastest and memorized it all. So I could deliver lectures on dysfunctional family, on brain chemistry. I could tell you all about the ahedonic brain and the need for dopamine and the primordial amygdala and how it replaces the control center of the brain. I just couldn't stop drinking.
Right. They used to call me in rehab the compliant client, because I would basically do all the assignments, I'd go to the groups, I would do all those things, but it never internalized.
You see, and part of the problem was I was student body president in Berkeley back in the 60s, and the concept of growing up, I could handle being a good father until the end, and then the business. But you brought up the concept of deserving. There was a real sense of entitlement.
Right.
I work this hard and do all these great things for other people. What about me? Don't I deserve to have a little relief? But at some point, it starts to take control, and what is initially consensual becomes a situation where, look, if I told you behind door one was spiritual happiness, a great family, a great marriage, wonderful financial success, and no consequences. Now, behind door two, as an alternative, you have illness, sickness, drunk driving, drunk texting, alienated relationships, bad health, legal consequences, loss of reputation. Now, who would willingly choose door two?
Well, the alcoholic, maybe.
So the point is that it's I'm responsible for all this, but it wasn't a willing choice. Alcohol recycles your brain, so the way that it initially hit me, which was a substance I could control, at some point began to control me.
Okay, we have a call. Let's take Michelle from North Hollywood. Is it harder for men? Is it harder for men versus women that they have a problem?
Yes. Yeah, I was curious. Is it harder for males, especially those in a very professional environment, to admit that they have a problem with alcoholism, as opposed to women? And I have a lot of family members, that are in more prestigious lines of business, and was just curious about that and what a male might do, to take that first step forward.
Well, I'll let Andrew and Leigh both answer that, since they are more successful than me. Andrew, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, why don't you take it, Judah?
Well, here's thank you, guys. This is KLEAN Radio with Leigh Steinberg, and tonight's guest is myself. And what I'd like to tell you is that I think women have less of the enzyme that metabolizes alcohol, and so it can affect them more deeply. But the problem is this. I remember being back at the Hall of Fame, and there was every owner in professional football, the greatest stars, all the press, everyone in that world. We were all in one hotel. So everybody drank, and the next morning, people sat at breakfast and said, "Oh, man, did I tie one on? Was I wasted last night?" and laughed about it. So that it's a macho world anyway. Right. Athletes are in a state of denial. Everyone around them is a state of denial. We're taught to be tough, to ignore pain, not to complain. So to get to the point of actually admitting that something was more powerful than me and I was ruining my life, I had to pierce a ton of denial. And I've had to deal with this publicly because the stories of it, ran from New Zealand to Manhattan to everywhere.
We're going to have to go to break. Thank you, Michelle, for the call. If you just tuned in, you're listening to KLEAN Radio Live with Leigh Steinberg tonight. And you might be listening to us all over the world. We're now on Extreme Talk XM, channel 165. The discussion continues at KLEANradio.com.
Are you struggling with an addiction that's ruining your life? Want to have a confidential conversation with a professional that will immediately assist you? Do you suspect a loved one is abusing drugs and would like a free drug testing kit and consultation? KLEAN Treatment Center is standing by right now to help those with addictions and the people who care about them. Call 888-601-6040. That's 888-601-6040. Or go to KLEAN Treatment Center, that's clean with a K, KLEANTreatmentCenter.com.
I just want to thank right away the people that actually took us here. We got to sit in a limo tonight, and I got to say, I mean, I haven't sat in a limo since a funeral, but they were really amazing. It's silverstarlimo.com. That's silverstarlimo.com, and I really want to thank our awesome driver, Pamela. Pamela, you got us here too quickly. I didn't get enough chance to talk in the back of the limo, but we're sitting in the studio tonight with Leigh Steinberg, famed super sports agent. Andrew, you're still, where was Waldo? Somewhere around Seattle.
That's right.
And we're having a talk tonight. But so we're in the studio, like I said, with Leigh Steinberg. Give us a call, by the way, at 888-539-2980. That's 888-539-2980. So you've said what a day looked like being the agent. What does a day look like now for Leigh Steinberg sober?
First of all, it has recovery and sobriety as the number one priority. So I came to the conclusion that without that, virtually nothing else would work. So putting that as the top priority was a dramatic switch for me. And so there are recovery activities. I go to meetings in a 12-step program. I work to 12 steps. I work with my sponsor. I actually have been tested for alcohol. And I'm trying to rebuild my business so that there's a lot of wreckage that occurred over these years financially and in other ways. So I've applied with the NFLPA for certification again. We'll hear within a couple weeks if that were to happen. Then I'd be back in the business, refunded, and represent athletes in football, baseball, basketball, hockey, soccer, mixed martial arts, golf, tennis, and all the fields. And then power a big marketing arm, which could market teams, leagues, and other individuals. And then creates a studio, not in the four-wall sense, but in the virtual sense. It does sports-themed motion pictures, the movies I've worked on, like Any Given Sunday and For the Love of the Game and Jerry McGuire, television shows, whether they be reality or superstar, mobile phone apps. There's so many ways, internet apps, to enjoy sports now and also take a position in health and nutrition. And then we have a Sporting Green Alliance. Right. And I've become convinced that the major issue of our time, outside of my sobriety, is climate change. And that I don't want to be part of the first group of parents in the history of the United States to hand down a lower quality of life to their children. It's here, we're in denial. So what I've done is to go to a series of conferences and aggregate technologies in wind, solar, water, resurfacing, recycling, to take to professional, collegiate, and high school stadia, arenas, and practice fields, which is some pretty serious real estate. And the goal is to drop carbon emissions and energy costs and to transform them into educational platforms so the millions of fans that come to a game can see a waterless urinal or a solar panel and think about how to integrate those into their own homes and businesses.
So you got a lot going on.
Well, and we've been working real hard on concussion awareness. This is an issue that's bothered me, and I finally came to the point back in the 90s where I thought, knowing what I do, even though the brain's the last frontier, I can't continue representing Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Warren Moon, Drew Bledsoe, Mark Burnell, Jake Plummer, without doing something on this issue. And we held a series of conferences, and about 6 years ago, finally I had neurologists that could document that 3 or more concussions seems to trigger an exponentially higher rate of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, premature senility, elevated rates of depression. And I called it a ticking time bomb and an undiagnosed health epidemic. This is, any of your listeners who have kids, this happens in all sports that have collision in them. AYSO soccer, kids who had the ball have lower test scores. So the way around it is awareness, but also baseline testing, giving a cognitive test prior to going out on the field to play. Then when a hit occurs, having a way to objectively diagnose how to make sure someone's asymptomatic at rest, on an exercise bike, at practice, and then finally go back on the field.
That's Andrew.
Yeah, Leigh, I'm impressed by how many things you're doing and how ambitious you are. How do you keep that balance of ambition and drive with your sobriety? It must be difficult. I
think it goes the other way for me. These last 2.5 years have been surrealistic. The plus has been that it gave me the first break in my life to actually take a look at what I was doing and to figure out what would help me stay sober. And a 12-step program and that fraternity is what worked for me, has worked so far, because I really have nothing to say about my state except 827 days. Because what happens is when you're relapsing and drinking, I would tell people, I've got it this time.
Right.
This is under control. This time is different. And the reality is that those end up not being true, not because you're consciously lying, but because
you believed it, though.
Exactly. And so at this state, just that. But to me, staying busy and having a lot of activities is what keeps me focused and keeps me charged. And I think I've learned enough in these last 2.5 years to incorporate that into more balance.
So, Leigh, do you have any advice for someone out there that, is down in the dumps, doesn't really have a job, and doesn't have the innate talent and success and that you've had? What would you say to them? Why should they become sober?
Because without sobriety, they have absolutely no chance. Every person can have great family relationships, but without sobriety, there's no chance. I've lived with very little money the last couple of years, but my son, who had been alienated from me, I finally went to his graduation and he came back. Now, that was more rewarding than anything that financial remuneration would ever do. There's also the issue of health. Unless you're really suicidal, alcohol affects all the organs of your body more severely than heroin does. And so eventually you start to become a burden on other people. If you value the friendships around you, if you value your children or your parents, if you value not being a drag on society, there's always hope as long as you're focused
and alive
as a human being. There's always hope. So for anyone out there going through the same sort of ritual of wanting to stop drinking, not being able to stop drinking, not understanding how badly life was disintegrating, pick a 12-step program and go, and have a moment of clarity.
By the way, if you just tuned in, you're listening to KLEAN Radio on KFWB News Talk 980 Los Angeles, our flagship station. You might also be listening to us on Extreme Talk, XM Channel 165, and also worldwide at KLEANRadio.com. Give us a call at 888-539-2980. That's 888-539-2980. We're in the studio tonight with Leigh Steinberg. Just amazing person. And it's funny, the more I don't even want to say, you're the first super sports agent, but you also happen to be just an amazing guy sitting in the studio tonight. Do you regret the past? And I know that it sounds like right now you're content, you're happy, you have a vision for the future of how you want, you're close with your son. Do you regret what happened?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely I regret it. But it's not helpful to wallow in it.
Right.
What's important is to learn from it and to make amends to real people who are in the world. What would happen is that the contrast between how I was sober, which was considerate, warm, focused, reliable,
right,
and what happened when I got drunk. There was an old R. Crumb poster back in the 60s that had about 6 panels, and it was about drugs, but it was called Stoned Again. And this fellow starts out as a totally perfect human being, and panel by panel his whole visage disintegrates until he's like a gelatinous pile of goo at the end of it. And in a sense, I regret the lost time. And the pain that I inflicted. What I can do is to try to make amends, to try to correct those situations. It wasn't like I was running around beating somebody up,
right.
but the point is that people who have a certain way of relating, watching someone disintegrate in front of them, it's really painful. And I hurt a lot of people that I loved.
Andrew?
I think that's very poignant, and it's the amount of pain and anguish that happens in whole family systems, not just to the addict themselves, but everyone they affect, can be quite significant, and it can lead to secondary effects, mental health-wise, for other family members: depression, suicidal ideation, anxiety, rage, problems with rage and anger. So, all these things have to be looked at, and if, family members have an alcoholic or a drug addict in their family, I'd encourage them to get help as much as I would encourage the primary person with the addiction.
The truth of the matter is that my moment of clarity and epiphany was based in large part on looking at the hurt and pain in my children and realizing they did not ask to be born in the world. It wasn't like they put in an application.
Right.
We chose to bring them in the world. And how responsible or conscionable was it for me to do something that could theoretically scar their life, where they'd look back on this period and have all sorts of psychological problems and fear and maybe their own addictive issues. So they needed to see their father become the person that they hoped he would. And I'm the opposite of arrogant about any of this. I know I'm at risk every single day, every single moment. And part of the reason I post my days on my Facebook and post them to my friends is so I never forget.
Right.
Because it'd be so easy to slip back into that lifestyle, and I don't want to forget.
I think something very important you're also talking about, because a lot of families, when the person or the loved ones get sober, the hardest thing they have is is like, oh, this time I'm going to stay sober. And when I got sober this time, I stopped saying to my mother, I'm sorry. I stopped telling her this is it, because I had said that so many times. And something you said very important is I believed it when I said it to her. There were times when I stopped drinking that I really believed that this was it, and I made promises that I thought I could keep. And
Didn't you tell yourself every morning, today's going to be different. Yeah. It's a new day. I'm not drinking tonight.
Exactly. And I believed it. And until 10 minutes later, I couldn't handle the pain and I needed a drink. So people out there that are listening, the family members, the loved ones, of course you're angry, and you have every right to be angry with the people in your life that are just, but understand that one thing at least is that when they made promises, sometimes they actually meant to keep it. The problem is when you have alcoholism and drug addiction, you can't always keep those promises.
And you lose your control center, which has to do with morality and ethics and control and all of those things. It's just gone. You're back to the primordial days where we were running from woolly mammoths and we just did instinctively whatever. The brain actually at the end confuses the need to drink or use or do any addictive behavior with breath itself and sends out cravings so strong that to not obey them feels like choking and dying.
Yeah. Andrew.
Yeah, it's I think it's hard for people that haven't really experienced addiction themselves with a family member or with themselves to really understand the complexity and the depth to which this problem can affect people. And also, we've become much more aware of how addiction is also tied to a lot of different types of behavioral illnesses and mental health issues like depression and anxiety, bipolar illness, and we've become much more sophisticated about treating that. The one thing that I would say is that, and I haven't heard tonight, is that, if someone is addicted and has been using or drinking for a long time, it's very important that they see a doctor to make sure that they undergo a proper detox, because there are extreme medical and physical issues that can occur from detoxing off of alcohol, benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax, without proper detox protocols.
It's funny you're talking about that, because I didn't know, Andrew, about all these. I obviously I knew from alcohol, if you detox, you could die. If you could have seizures, right? Mm-hmm. But Xanax is also extremely dangerous.
Well, all the benzodiazepine class, which includes Xanax and Valium, is probably, I think, still one of the most popular. Those are the most likely class of drugs to induce seizures, and one seizure is one seizure too many.
And we should make the point that the cross use of those substances, for example, if you drink and you're using Vicodin, or you drink and you're using something else, have the potential to kill you, because they slow your breathing down, and they work synergistically. The reality of the situation is that even if your liver test, when you go for that, doesn't show anything positive, you really have to almost do an MRI of the liver, because virtually anybody who drinks has a liver that becomes fatty and enlarged. And I want to live for a long time.
Right, and be healthy.
And so that was not an attractive part of it. The worst part of this is a lot of the people who have these problems are young, and they believe they'll live forever.
Right.
And then those of us who got the problem older, we thought, well, we're older, so we haven't had endless years of abuse, and either way leads down a dark road.
Well, I'm really happy you're talking about this, because, okay, I'm younger. I got sober when I was 22. I'm 36 right now. And even for me, it's hard when I see people cross-pollinating their, when I see them taking Xanax with drinking. And I want to say, what are you doing?
Well, what they're doing is that once they've had alcohol, what they're not doing is thinking and using judgment, because at that point, most people just want to stay high.
Right.
And that judgment that would tell you, mixing those two things is potentially poisonous.
And we're not saying this as sober people. We're saying this is factual. We're not, we're saying this.
And these aren't just alcoholics.
Right.
I mean, people, that are overdosing by accident, or, well over 58% of them are mixing one or more substances. So, it's a real problem, and I think that we saw a lot in the '60s with Quaaludes. Quaaludes were just a barbiturate that.
Okay, I just saw Leigh make it. Like, I got to ask. Okay, Leigh. Okay, because.
She wants to know how many he had.
Yeah, I don't know. Because Quaaludes, I hear this all the time, and I heard this when I was in rehab when I was 18 from my drug counselor, where he goes, you would have loved Quaaludes. He goes, because I was an alcoholic, and I guess it was, what is this thing with Quaaludes? What is it?
It was, frankly, they don't make them anymore.
Right.
But back in the day, and I haven't done any drugs since the Berkeley days, really, but back in the day, they made you feel absolutely wonderful. Your brain was still focused, but your body turned to rubber. And you remember that scene in Fast Times at Ridgemont High where Sean Penn takes the kid's car and Quaaludes, and then as he starts to crash into the background, he says, "People on ludes should not drive. But they were just part of the whole party atmosphere in the late 70s and 80s. And
they've been banned, right?
They're not made anymore. The thing that happened was when we were back at school, unlike Bill Clinton, a lot of us did inhale. And but to the extent that I had a family and was working around athletes where it was proscribed, it just had to drop out of my life. It was not consistent with it. That pushed me towards a drug I wouldn't have used as much, which was alcohol, which I didn't like the taste of, but it was legal and accepted.
It was also because did you feel like you could control it?
Oh, absolutely. Are you kidding? When I was in college, we drank over the weekends. We were students. We were trying to get into law school, or we were trying to get good grades in grad school. But the point is that, and of course we were underage for some of that time, but later on, you realize that it was almost like being a kid in Pinocchio, where you could go to that Stromboli's Island and you could drink and break things and smoke and all the rest of it. But at the end, you grow a tail like a donkey,
right?
Which will ruin most people's days. And
it's something you think in the beginning you have control over, and then one day it just has control over you. And you don't even realize it as it's happening. And
so the whole concept that people who've never experienced this have, that if you only had more willpower, if you just had stronger will, you could stop it. And I felt that way. Willpower worked for everything in my life. It meant I could do amazing amounts of things. I could parent and run a huge practice and write books and give speeches and do everything. Willpower did not work in this situation.
Andrew, do you think that's one of the biggest myths that people have out there?
Certainly, I think that the fact that once somebody is impaired to the level that Leigh's talking about, that just through willpower that they're going to be able to stop drinking and not have a problem is pretty much a myth. There's an occasional person you'll find, one needle in a haystack that can manage to do it.
Jimmy Buffett?
Well, I don't know about him, but... But, the vast majority of people that get to that point are not able to control it on their own and need to find a deeper solution than just saying to themselves, I'm going to stop. And that's because it involves, as Leigh has mentioned earlier, parts of the brain that are not in the conscious being. There's a lot of subconscious drives that are very primitive that are desperately seeking that substance at that point. And that's why they call alcohol an intoxicant. It's a toxin, and your body has this reaction to it that's toxic, and yet it still craves it. And so it's a very difficult thing for someone just to take it on their own and say, hey, you know what, I can just stop this with my own free will. It's definitely a medical condition, and we're just beginning to learn more and more about it. And treatment methods are improving every day. So there's a lot of hope out there, and that's one of the messages that I really like to have go out on the show is that as much as our stories are graphic and we hear some really horrific things happening to people, the reality is that there's an incredible amount of hope and there's an incredible amount of healing that can happen for both the addict and their families.
And there are a lot of people out there who will help. As long as you're trying, they will help. And the reason I went public with my situation was, first of all, I knew it would be inevitable, just so I'm not so self-righteous here. But second of all, I wanted to make sure that if there's anyone out there that was in as much pain and denial as I was, who had a brain where when you take the first drink, it's like, caramba, time to party, and then all bets are off. You move into an altered state with the first drink, and then just, how do I even say it?
It's almost like you could breathe.
And you want to stay high.
Yeah.
You want to stay in that, and nothing will interrupt it. So I wanted to make sure that people understood that that's exactly where I was. And if you're like I was, that you can use a 12-step program. You can use other ways. And my brain is a pickle. It's not turning back into a cucumber. This is something I have to manage every day of my life. But it is possible.
And I think something also very important to talk about, but we're running out of time, is that let's call a spade a spade. You could mess up. You messed up a life as pretty much anyone can. And I don't, thank God you're smiling as I say that, but you did a good job of it. And as good a job building, you did sort of with the other stuff. And you're sober. And I think that's so important for people to hear, because as people are in those long, dark hallways, whether they're going through divorce, they're losing their businesses, and we're seeing that a lot now with today's economic times, there is hope out there for people.
The one message I heard was, when you look around a 12-step meeting, is you see people who are going through the death of children, cancer, blindness, divorce, and their message that resonated to me was, you can go through all those things and don't have to drink over it.
Right. And I think that's extremely important, because it's like, it's like people, you have kids that if you could stop now, it's only going to get better. But if you continue with the problem, I can promise you, if you continue drinking, it's not going to make anything better.
One of the illusions they use is play the tape out. Play out what you're doing to what happens at the end. And it goes to your point that it's not going to get better. In other words, there's something called euphoric recall,
right,
where people remember all the good times and forget how much horror there was in it. And you need to be at least vigilant enough to stay out of euphoric recall.
Andrew, we're running out of time.
The most stunning example of that is people that are smoking crack and think that they're going to really succeed at that point. And it's amazing how denial is so effective in stopping people from realizing how self-destructive they're being. And I think that's an important thing for family members to hear also, that people that are getting high on substances as strong as crack and meth, crystal meth, they really actually believe that somehow there's a good outcome to their drug use, because for a short time it works for them. It makes them feel more normal and better. But then there's a horrible backside to it. So,
I want to thank both of you for having this forum that offers hope. I mean, you're doing God's work, and I thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I want to just say quickly to everybody out there listening, Andrew Spanzik, who runs KLEAN, is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, and he has a heart of gold, and he's a hard time saying no. So anybody out there that's listening tonight, and you're going through a rough time, I beg of you to call KLEAN. Andrew and I and all the people at KLEAN will try to figure out the best we can to get you help and get you a bed. Andrew gives away, he doesn't talk about this a lot. He gives away not only 2 beds a month, probably 4 beds a month to people that need help. And, where's Waldo? I want to see you soon back in the studio.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back. I really miss being in the studio, and it's a little harder on the phone. But, Leigh, thank you so much again. It was great to hear your voice and watch you on the video. And I just really praise all of the work you're doing.
Are we on television?
Yeah,
No,
you're on the video feed on the internet.
What's it go? We're running out of time. Andrew, you could give Leigh a hug the next time you're in town. I just want to thank a few people. I want to thank all the people that helped put this on. I want to thank Patrick over there, Steve. I think you're going to get married one of these days, and I know you are. And I want to thank Rand, Caroline, Jesse, and all the people that puts the take on the show. I want to thank Silver Star Limo for getting us here. And I want to thank Pamela, the driver. You did an awesome job. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the amazing and great Leigh Steinberg. And I beg of you, this guy is just awesome. I mean, I just want to thank you. You're more of a hero of mine because what you've done in the last 2 years than ever before, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And the discussion continues at KLEANradio.com. We'll see you next week.
Are you struggling with an addiction that's ruining your life? Want to have a confidential conversation with a professional that will immediately assist you? Do you suspect a loved one is abusing drugs and would like a free drug testing kit and consultation? KLEAN Treatment Center is standing by right now to help those with addictions and the people who care about them. Call 888-601-6040. That's 888-601-6040. or go to KLEAN Treatment Center, that's clean with a K, cleantreatmentcenter.com.